and welcome to my channel. I'm so happy to have you here, and in this video we're going to be learning how to learn optimally. It's important to note that there are two ways of thinking. There's focused thinking and diffuse thinking. So focused thinking is similar to a laser beam. It's really intense. Focused thinking is when you're actively learning something, when you're taking in information and when you're trying to learn it or trying to comprehend something. This requires a lot of energy and a lot of concentration. Then we have diffuse thinking. So diffuse thinking is more when the laser beam is not so lasered, it's like diffused, as the name suggests. So it's spread out. You might be in the mode of diffuse thinking when you're going for a walk, when you're in the shower, when you're just laying there, letting your mind wander from subject to subject without particularly focusing on any one thing. Why are these important? Well, these modes of thinking are very important. A, because when you're focused, you're taking in new information. But you do need to move from focused thinking to diffuse thinking in order to allow your brain to understand and absorb all this information that you've just taken in. This space allows the brain to comprehend and work out all the information that you have just input into it itself. Even when we don't realize it, unconsciously our brain is working for us in diffuse mode thinking. There have been many examples of this. There's a method called the Pomodoro method. The Pomodoro method is where you allow yourself 25 minutes, you set a timer, and during that mode, you're going to be in focus mode. You're going to be studying, you're going to do it as much as you can within those 25 minutes. After those 25 minutes, you allow yourself a 5-minute reward with which you're allowed to do anything you want. So you can go on your phone, you can text someone back, you can send a voice message, you can go outside, you can play with your dogs. This way, you're allowing yourself to go into the focus mode of thinking and the diffuse mode of thinking. And also, you're giving yourself a reward. So this means that you're likely to finish the 25 minutes of concentrated study. There's also a method called the Feynman Technique. Now, the Feynman Technique is where you take whatever topic you want to learn about, you write it at the top of the page, and then you try to put it into simplified language. You try to teach it to someone else, and you try to come up with different analogies to explain the concept that you're learning. Another method is to self-test. So this means that you are constantly testing yourself to see what you know. This is good because then you figure out what you don't know, and then you know what you need to work on and what you need to study more of. Another technique that is extremely valuable when it comes to learning optimally is recall. So you watch a video related to a topic you're learning, and then you stop the video. You try to recall everything that you've learned. This way, again, similarly to self-testing, you're figuring out what you've learned and what you still need to work on.
Chunking is an extremely effective method for learning. Chunking is where you take individual pieces of information and you group it with other pieces of information in order to form a group or a chunk. This chunk is more easy for your brain to remember. For example, your bank card number is 16 individual digits. Yet, in order for you to remember these numbers, you may group them into groups of 4. Using acronyms is another example of chunking. You may remember the acronym, My Very Easy Method just sums up 9 planets, in order to help you remember the names of the planets. Chunking is extremely effective because your short-term memory can only hold a limited number of spaces for information. So by chunking the information, you remember more information more easily.
Interleaving helps you learn optimally because you're not just focused on one topic or one problem at the same time. Interleaving means mixing up topics and mixing up problems together. So for example, if you're studying language learning and you're studying predominantly the vocabulary to do with shopping, you may interleave and do not just shopping, but you might do also maybe fashion or clothes or environment as well, and mix them all together. It's always best to give your brain a challenge. It's best to do the most difficult things in the morning. When you wake up, you have the most energy you're going to have for the day, and you want to prioritize doing the most difficult things first. Plus, when you get the most difficult tasks done, Then you have the rest of the day to enjoy all the easy tasks that you have to do. Just makes your day a little more easier, rather than leaving it till the end of the day, with which you might have a feeling of dread of doing it, and even postpone, procrastinate, or put it off, which is procrastinating.
Duh.
Now let's move on to some illusions of competence. What are illusions of competence? You've spent 3 hours studying, but just because you've spent 3 hours studying doesn't mean that it's been the most effective and optimal use of your time. Maybe you've only grasped one concept. When we try to cram, our brain has only 4 to 7 working memory slots, which I'll get into later, but it can only hold a certain amount of new information while it's trying to figure out and grasp new concepts. This is why cramming just simply doesn't work. Einstellung is the German word for attitude. And Einstellung is basically when you have solved the problem before, you've created neural connections in your brain that makes it easier to go back to that way of thinking for new problems. The problem is that way of thinking isn't always the optimal way of thinking for new problems. So it's good to be mindful of your habits and your ways of thinking to solve new problems, and that maybe the way you used to think to solve a problem isn't going to be the most optimal way to solve a new problem. The act of highlighting, I think, gives us the illusion that we're actually learning. But when we highlight words, we're literally just highlighting words. I mean, if you highlight a lot of words, for example, a paragraph, how many of those words are you actually going to remember? Probably none. So what's important is really to grasp the meaning behind the words that you're highlighting. If you can simplify what you've just highlighted, or if you can write little keynotes at the side of your page, break it down to what it really means. If you understand the meaning of something, you'll remember it much more than if you just highlight a paragraph or highlight sentences here and there. Just make sure you're not highlighting and thinking you're learning, because you're probably not if you're highlighting a lot. That rhymes. Now let's go on to memory. Let's talk about memory. Let's talk about you and me. Let's talk about all the good things and bad things that make me. Let's talk about memory. We have our working memory and we have long-term memory. In our working memory, there are 4 slots which can take in information. So this means that you cannot take in so much information that your brain is overloaded. You take in the information, it's in your working memory. When it's in your working memory, your brain is literally trying to grasp and understand all this new information. Let's stop saying we have a bad memory. You don't have a bad memory. You have an arm, you have a face, but a memory isn't something that you actually have. Memory is a process. A process is something you can get better at. We don't have bad memories. You have a bad process of remembering. The first step in remembering something is actually paying attention. So first of all, if you don't pay attention, it's not in your brain. Like, you cannot remember something you didn't pay attention for. So if some people tell me their names and I don't pay attention, I cannot go back into my brain and figure out what their name is because it's not there. I didn't store it there. So attention.
Do I have your attention? Do I have your attention? Do I have your attention? Do I have your attention?
And your brain encodes the information, and then you have the retrieval process. We have neural networks in our brains, and the more that we go back to the same content, this strengthens the neural connections. Like when you're walking a path and many people have walked the same path, it becomes more clear and more forged. This is why practice and repetition, especially for learning, is really, really important. Let's talk about our long-term memory. Your working memory has about 4 slots with which you can take in new information. So how do we get that information from working memory to long-term memory? Well, I just said it. We practice. Repetition, repetition, repetition. The more we go and retrieve that information, the stronger those neural connections become, and it moves from working memory to long-term memory. So our long-term memory is kind of like a warehouse. It can store millions of pieces of information. And the more, as I said, you go and find and retrieve the information that's stored there, the stronger the connections grow and the easier it is to find that piece of information again. Practice makes permanent. The more you practice retrieving information, the easier it'll be for your brain to retrieve that piece of information. Spaced intervals is another technique that's really beneficial for optimal learning. Not studying the same topic every day. If you're studying the same vocab Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, again, you're overloading your brain. Your brain needs space to understand, grasp the concept, and work it out for itself. It's best to space out your learning. So you might learn the vocab for example, shopping on Monday, Wednesday, Friday. How to improve memory. Memory is a process. It's a process that you can practice, So the more you practice, the better your memory becomes. There's also something called a memory palace that a lot of memory experts. So the memory palace is basically where you use something or an environment that you're already familiar with. For example, you might use your bedroom. Then you imagine the content that you're learning in that room. If you associate something you already know with a new piece of content, it's much easier for you to remember that content. I'll give you an example. If you meet a lot of new people and one of those people looks similar to somebody that you already know, you will much more easily remember their name than other people. Often, memory experts put new concepts or new ideas into familiar places so that they learn these concepts much more easily. You can also do that too. If you're learning a new concept or new words, you might see the words bouncing on your bed, or you might see the words sitting in a chair that you love. It's your memory palace, so you decide. If you have all your senses engaged when you learn a new concept, if you use touch, sound, and smell, when you're learning something new, you try and imagine it in all these ways. This way, it's going to help you remember it much more easily. The more crazy you make stories or your memory palace, the easier it's going to be to retrieve the information.
Brain health, similarly to physical health, is taking care of your brain in the best way possible. An important part of brain health is nutrients. Omega-3 is extremely important for efficient brain health. Omega-3 reduces inflammation, and also it produces higher cognitive performance in those with high levels of omega-3. People with larger hippocampal volumes tend to have larger amounts of omega-3. The hippocampus is a structure in the brain that's responsible for learning and memory. Higher levels of omega-3 are said to increase abstract reasoning and the ability to solve complex problems using logical thinking. Exercise, just as it's extremely important for our physical health, is also extremely important for our brain health. After you take a run or go for a walk out in nature, you'll notice that your thoughts feel much more clear. If you go for a walk or go for a run or do some kind of sports, you'll notice that you feel so much better after doing it. Your mind is much more clear and often really good ideas come to you.
Sleep is so important because it actually washes out toxic proteins in your brain called beta amyloids. And if you don't get enough of it, these toxins won't be removed. And it's actually been found that there's a lot of beta amyloid with Alzheimer's patients, which is clear that there's probably a link between lack of sleep and Alzheimer's. I'm sure you've felt it yourself. With lack of sleep, you almost feel like there's something weighing you down slightly. You can't perform optimally. You can't think optimally. And if you're very, very tired, it's almost like you're drunk. It's really dangerous. It's dangerous to drive. It's dangerous to function. You literally can't. Your brain is not functioning properly. Procrastination is actually your body's way of defending and protecting yourself. When you think of something you have to do, like study a subject, it feels painful because you don't want to do it, and your body wants to protect you from that pain. So instead, it decides to do something more pleasing. For example, like going on YouTube. Your brain will do anything but that because it thinks that thing is painful and going to hurt you. The thing is, if you know your cue, you can overcome this and say, I'll just do 5 minutes. Once you get over that initial pain, it will become much easier and much more enjoyable. It's just about getting started. It's similar to working out. Know your cues. Then there's usually the routine. So you have the cue, you pick up your phone, that's the routine. Then you have a reward. You get the dopamine from the phone. You're not feeling pain. And then also we have to be careful of our beliefs. If you say that you believe you're a bad procrastinator, then well, it's going to be hard for you not to procrastinate. You need to get rid of all distractions. You need to turn off your notifications. You need a conducive environment for learning. So where are you learning? Where are you studying? Do you think you learn better in a library? Great, go there. The only thing to be careful of is when you study in the same place all the time, you learn to learn there. However, then in the test situation, you're in a different environment and this can throw you off a little bit. So although it is good to be in a conducive environment to study, it's important not to get attached to that spot and only go to that spot for studying. We have two modes of thinking, diffused and focus mode. Focus mode is like the laser beam when we concentrate and we take a new piece of information. Diffused mode is relaxed mode of thinking. When you go for a walk, take a shower, run. This is really important for learning. Relaxation and time away from concentration is really, really, really important. And actually, I think it's something that's very underestimated in our schools, unfortunately. Then we also have methods like the Pomodoro method, 25 minutes of intense concentration, 5-minute reward break. Doing this is more effective than cramming, as we've only 4 working memory slots in our memory and our brain can only take in a certain amount of information. Then we have the Feynman Technique, simplify your idea, write it down, teach it to someone else, use different analogies and simplified language. If you can teach it to someone else, then you understand the topic well enough. Different techniques like recall, self-test, interleaving, and spaced intervals. This is the same with working out. You're not meant to work out every single day. You're meant to allow your body space and time for the muscles to repair themselves. It's the exact same with the brain. Of course, it's not repairing itself. It's just understanding and comprehending the information that you've just taken in. And then we have our illusions of competence. So we have Einstellung, not repeating a process you've done in the past just because it worked in the past. We have highlighting lots of information. Instead, remember, figure out the meaning of it. And then our memory. So our working memory and our long-term memory. Practice makes it permanent. So the more you go and retrieve a piece of information, the more easy it will be to retrieve it in the future. Remember to pay attention when you're trying to remember something. You do not have a bad memory. You have a bad process of remembering, and that can be improved. You improve your memory through good diet, omega-3, and exercise, good sleep. Important to get rid of those toxins. You can beat procrastination by having a conducive environment, knocking off all distractions. There is a such thing as good and bad procrastination. So basically, procrastination is when you're doing something other than something else that you should be doing, right? But if you're doing something that's more important to you than something you should be doing, then actually that's good procrastination. So don't be so hard on yourself when you procrastinate. Just think, what is the most important thing for me to learn right now? Like, what is the most important thing I should be doing right now? What is the most beneficial thing I can be doing right now for me, for my life, for my goals? I'm going to do that. Out of everything I can do, I'm going to do that. Thank you so much for viewing my video. This is quite long. Thank you. Bye.